You're listening to Quorum Radio.
Andy Warhol famously said that in the future, everybody will be famous for at least 15 minutes. Well, I don't know if I can lay claim to that, but maybe for 5 minutes. And in my case, there's something that's quite interesting that happened to me. Back when I lived in Columbia, I actually got in touch with William Colby, former director of the Central Intelligence Agency. And it happened approximately 10 days before he disappeared, died. Basically what happened was that going back prior to that, some months, I was in New York. I would travel between Columbia and New York to do different things. So I was walking on the street one day, walking on 42nd Street, and right on 3rd Avenue at 42nd was a very, very large store, Sam Goody store, where they sold records or CDs, I guess, at the time, and cassettes for sure. And in there was this huge case with books that were like closeouts that, they had tried to sell them for, $29.95, and lots of them were left over in inventories, and so they were for sale for like $1 or $2. So I picked up one of these books. It was a book by William E. Colby, former director of the CIA, called Lost to Victory. It was about Vietnam, about his time running the Phoenix program in Vietnam, which was to fight the insurgency in Vietnam. Controversial program, but in any case, I was fascinated with the book, fascinated with the story and what it meant, and the experience that William Colby had. So, long story short, I returned to Columbia with a book, which I was just so fascinated with. In fact, even on my honeymoon, my wife took a picture of me reading it, But long story short, in 1996, springtime, like it was about April, mid to late April, I decided to try to reach him. So I called the publisher of the book Lost Victory, and to my frustration, when I asked to get the contact details of the author, William E. Colby, they said they couldn't do that, and that I could write them a letter, and then if he wanted to, he could turn around and contact me if he wanted to. And so that to me just said, yeah, this is not going to prosper. The mail isn't so good between Columbia and the United States, and the publishers, they have no incentive. They have no reason to cooperate with my request, so that might just die in the vine. So I decided to do something else, which was that I called information. And on the assumption that William E. Colby, given the fact that he worked for U.S. government for quite some time, at one point he was even ambassador to NATO, he was probably a Washington, D.C. type creature, and even his retirement. So I called information. At that time, it was the area code, his area code was 702 or 703, whichever of those two. I just went on the assumption that he probably lived in Virginia, as many people do who work in the military establishment or the CIA. So long story short, called and I said, give me the number for William E. Colby. So they had a number. They gave me the phone number. I wrote it down. I called, 2 rings, and this elderly gentleman picks up the phone. And I said, are you William Colby? He said, yes. And I said, you the author of Lost Victory? Yes. So here I am, speaking to the former director of the CIA. The idea was I wanted to actually bring him to Columbia, because every year they'd have an event called the Columbia Seminar, organized by the military or Cátedra de Columbia. And they have an important speaker who had something worthwhile to say of interest to the Army. And they did people of all sorts of backgrounds with different positions on different issues. And I figured this man would be fascinating for the Cátedra de Columbia, the Columbia Seminar, to talk about his experience in kind of leading the counterinsurgency through the Phoenix program in Vietnam, because Columbia at the time, of course, was involved in a very, very difficult fight with the FARC and ELN and EPL and all these different guerrilla factions. And so I thought he would be a perfect speaker. So I wanted to become his agent. And so as I told him, and he was very nice, very cordial. In fact, he even asked me if I was any relation to a Macintosh he knew in the OSS, which was the forerunner of the CIA. And just a great person, just very, very nice, very gracious. And so I said, what I want to do is I want to see about you, coming down here to be made a fee, and then assuming we get a sponsor or we get the money, of course, I would earn a little commission. And he was open to the idea. I didn't have a problem, so I later sent him an email, or rather, I'm sorry, no emails then that were widely available. I didn't send him an email. I sent him a fax message, and sure that was in his personal effects later on, just to propose that I'd be his agent and all. And long story short, I wanted to do this with Tom Quinn, who was a friend, who was also the correspondent for Time magazine for Colombia. And so you see, Tom Quinn knew Manuel Bonet, General Manuel Bonet of it was like the commander-in-chief of the Colombian Armed Forces, at least in the military, as regards to military, reported the president, of course. But the idea was that Tom was going to help me get in touch with Manuel Bonet, and they were somehow going to find a way to get the funds and bring William Colby to Colombia to talk about fighting communist insurgency. So anyway, so days went by, got involved with other things, and all of a sudden I get a phone call from Tom Quinn, and he says, "Hey, I can't believe it. Your friend, he disappeared." I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" "Oh, what friend?" "This William Colby. He went kayaking and he disappeared, and apparently they found his body." And what? I was stunned. And this is like we're talking late spring. This is like early May that he and I spoke, Tom Quinn and I. I was shocked. So long story short, it turns out apparently my phone was bugged, and I later left that place and moved to another place, and I didn't disclose my domicile to anybody except the U.S. Embassy. And long story short, about 4 months later, I was contacted by the U.S. Embassy telling me that I was going to be possibly kidnapped or killed by the FARC. So they suggested I just leave town, which we did, my wife and I. And so we flew to the capital, and a few days later, we flew to the United States, and that was that. And then a few months later, it turns out that my friend Tom Quinn, Time magazine correspondent for Colombia, was killed. He and his wife were in a car, suspicious circumstances. We didn't really know what happened. Some speculate that since he was the scriptwriter for a Colombian soap opera or telenovela called Green Fire or Fuego Verde, about the emerald, the emerald trade and the emerald miners and all those people who, some of whom could be easily upset. So some think that he was killed because of that. Who knows? But in any case, yeah. So I reached out to William Colby, and about 10 days later, he disappears. But it also gets interesting because many, many years later, like about 25 years later, I ended up getting to know a really good friend of his who was a CIA contractor. And I was introduced to him. He's somebody who's got a podcast called The Two Mics. And so long story short, I was just like introduced over the phone. I was a producer for somebody, and they put me in. He connected me. And we ended up, instead of having just a brief, "Hello, how are you? Nice to meet you. Yeah, I look forward to talking to you again." It was a 2-hour phone call talking about his friend, William E. Colby. It was quite interesting. And then my boss, who, put us in touch, he saw that the conversation was so prolonged that he went off and had dinner and came back like 2 hours later. But in any case, yeah, that was my little story on talking to William Colby before he tragically disappeared, the former director of the CIA. Thanks, folks, for listening to Quorum Global Radio. If you like this, of course, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel, and until later.